Well, hello, Year 4. I hope you're keeping well. We're getting near Christmas, aren't we? And so I've been invited to come and talk to you a bit about the Christmas story and to talk to you about why Christians feel that Christmas is important. So without further ado, I'm going to share my PowerPoint for you. And before we actually get on to the story, just a few things that are worth noting about stuff that we know or think we know. Firstly, 25th of December is Christmas Day, the day we celebrate Jesus' birth. So the natural assumption is that Jesus was born on the 25th of December. We don't know. We have no idea when Jesus was born. We celebrate his birth, but that doesn't mean that was the day he was born on. 25th of December, way back before Christianity, was a sort of a pagan festival. And when the early church was established and Christianity started to spread and sort of become the sort of main religion of different countries, the decision was to use any major festivals to sort of cover over those pagan festivals. And so it was chosen that Christmas Day would be on the 25th of December. Something else worth noting about his birth, we don't know what year he was born. We have this whole system where we have, well, certainly used quite a bit still, of BC, meaning before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, the Latin for the year of the Lord. And the understanding when it was first established was that Jesus was born on 1 AD, the first year of our Lord. Since then, we've worked out that actually probably he wasn't born on that year. By reading through the Bible and seeing what other things are recorded and comparing them with history outside of the Bible, most experts now reckon that Jesus was born somewhere between 8 and 4 BC. Seems strange, that, doesn't it? He was born before Christ. It's also worth noting that details of Jesus's birth is only mentioned in 2 of the Gospels. The New Testament, the later part of the Bible, has got 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And it's the Gospels that sort of cover the sort of life story of Jesus. And 2 of those choose not to mention anything about his childhood. They go straight in at when he was probably about 30. It's only Matthew and Luke that cover his birth and his childhood, and then not a great deal of detail. So it's worth noting that. And as I go through this story, I'm going to highlight a few things that maybe we've assumed that now historians and experts probably raise question about. And the first thing is, well, Jesus's mother was Mary. I'm using this sort of comic strip version of the nativity story, as we call it. Nativity is a sort of story about a birth. So in this, it has Mary, and what you could work out, maybe she's there, 18, 20, 22, something like that. Likelihood, Mary was a lot younger than that. We would not be surprised if Mary was as young as 13. In Jesus's time, people didn't live as long, and often marriage would happen a lot earlier than in these days, and also having babies would be a lot earlier than it does these days. Mary was, well, let's say somewhere between 13 and 16 probably, and she was engaged to be married to a guy called Joseph. Engagement was probably treated a lot more serious than it is today, as was marriage. And so in many ways, although she was only engaged, it still meant that in some ways she was really tied to Joseph. And it just so happened that one day she was just doing whatever sort of housework and stuff that she would normally do, when suddenly an angel appeared And I have no idea what angels look like. This comic strip has them looking like some sort of superhero almost. But what we do know is that this angel appeared before Mary, and not surprisingly, whether they look like this or look something differently, she was absolutely petrified. And the angel said to her, Mary, don't worry, you're okay, you've got nothing to fear. I come from God with a message. And it's a pretty important message, really. You're going to have a baby. Now, that was quite a surprise to Mary, because in those days, you did not have a baby until you were married. It was the law. And to have a baby outside marriage was a really serious problem, a punishable problem. So Mary, not surprisingly, when this angel says, you're going to have a baby, goes, I think you've got a mistake here. Not me. No way. I'm not married yet. But the angel said to her, well, you're going to have a baby. God's been looking down on you. And he thinks you are really special. And so you are going to have his baby. You're going to have the Son of God, and you're to call him Jesus, which means God saves. And Mary said, well, how can this happen when I'm not married? And he said, well, because God is going to make it happen. And she thought for a moment, and she said, well, if this is God's will, so be it. I am the Lord's servant. Which was all well and good, but then, as I say, she was engaged to be married to Joseph, and so she had to tell Joseph, I'm going to have a baby. Now, as I say, in those days, a baby outside marriage, I appreciate things are very, very different today, but in those days, if you had a baby outside marriage, the woman, and rules applied more to women than men in those days, I have to say, the woman, if she was going to have a baby and she wasn't married, she was to be taken outside the city gates and stoned to death by her family, because she would have brought shame on them. So Mary should have been killed. But Joseph really loved Mary. And so he said to her, look, I can't marry you. You're having somebody else's baby. I'm not having that. But look, I don't want to see you die. Let's just separate. You go your way, I'll go mine, and we'll forget about it. Okay. Mary was obviously a bit disappointed, but she understood. But one night, while Joseph was sleeping, he had a dream. And in that dream, an angel appeared. And that angel said to him, look, Joseph, what Mary has told you is true. We know she's not married to you yet, but she's having a baby, and it's God's baby. It's going to be the Lord, the Son of God, the chosen one, the Messiah, as he would be called. And so when Joseph woke up, he said to Mary, okay, I get it now. I've had that same message that you've had. Let's go for it. Well, you can imagine probably, it's not mentioned in the Bible, but for the months that Mary's tummy got larger, probably the neighbours would have looked and they would have been quite shocked that Joseph was sticking by her. He must be a fool, they probably gossiped to one another. And they looked down at what? That shameless hussy about Mary. But Joseph and Mary stuck with each other and said, no, we're getting married, we're going to have this baby. And then later that year, just as Jesus was ready to be born, something happened. At that time, Israel was under the control of the Romans. It was part of the Roman Empire. And therefore, the person in charge of Israel was the emperor in Rome. And it just so happened that he decided to declare something. I want you all to go to the home, in other words, where you were born, and I want to hold a census. I want to count you all. probably because he was thinking, I need to raise a bit of tax, and if we knew exactly how many people we've got in the empire, I can tax each person, raise a bit of money, build up my army. And so at the time, Mary and Joseph had been living in a town called Nazareth, but Joseph had been born in Bethlehem. It was quite an important town. It was the town where David, King David, the guy who beat Goliath, was born. And King David, as he had been in the past, some several centuries previous, was always regarded as the best king that Israel had ever had. And so Bethlehem was held in great esteem. Joseph had to go to Bethlehem and take Mary with him to be counted. And so off they went, with her heavily pregnant. And this image is quite an ordinary image for Mary and Joseph on their way to Bethlehem on a donkey. A donkey is not mentioned in the Bible, not at this stage in the life of Mary and Joseph. Chances are they would not have had a donkey. We know Joseph was a carpenter, and carpentry wasn't a particularly well-paid job in those days. So it was likely that probably Mary and Joseph had to walk all the way from Nazareth to Bethlehem. But as I say, our imagination often puts them on a donkey. So this comic strip has him on a donkey. And when they got to Bethlehem, well, if you imagine everybody who was alive, who had ever been born in Bethlehem, had to go back there for this census, for this count up. And so not surprisingly, it was blooming busy. And so when they got there, Mary said, Joseph, I think I'm going to have this baby. I think we need to find somewhere sort of a bit private for me to have the baby. Well, because it was so crowded, there was nowhere to go. It's not as though, Joseph had moved probably quite a few years ago. Just because he was born there, there was no relatives to stay with or anything. And so Joseph started knocking on people's doors. Oh, we often talk about as though he knocked on inns, as though there was a premier inn or a holiday inn in Bethlehem. They didn't tend to have hotels in those days. So he would have just knocked on people's doors and sort of said, like, any chance you could put us up? But everywhere he went, people going, I'm sorry, I'm already looking after a few people. I haven't got room for you as well. Not when your wife's about to have a baby. And so he went around knocking on people's doors. And eventually he met up with somebody who said, look, I haven't got any room for you, not in my home, but look, come with me and see what you think about this. And he led them to a place where he looked after his animals. Often in Christmas stories, you will hear about a stable. They didn't have stables in those days. That's something that, again, what we have created in our imaginations. Often they would look after animals in a cave, or they might actually even move them into a particular room in their house, but trust me, that would get a bit smelly. And so this guy says to Joseph and Mary, look, yeah, I haven't got any, no bedrooms, no beds. Well, this is dry, it's clean-ish, bit smelly, animal or two, but you'll be private. And in the end, Joseph and Mary said, right, okay, let's go there. And so they had their baby there. And of course, you don't find cots or beds in a place for looking after animals, but there was a trough, a manger as it's called, where the animals fed. So they cleared it away a bit and put Jesus in the manger and used that as a cot. And just to pause here, I just sort of ask you to imagine what that must have been like for Mary. I don't know if you've got a baby brother or a baby sister, but I remember when we were preparing for our children, we got everything ready. We had nappies, we had bottles, we had clothes, we had sterilizer and wet wipes, all ready. So that as soon as the baby was born, no problem, it'd all be there. Well, it wouldn't have been quite like that in Mary's day, but I'm sure that back in Nazareth, she'd got everything ready. And then, of course, being then told, right, we want you in Bethlehem. Well, she didn't have a chance to sort of gather it all together. She couldn't gather all the stuff together. She could hardly carry a cot. So when she gets to Nazareth, she's got nothing. And I wonder if she thought, oh my word, what have I done? God asked me to have his baby. I've had his baby, but look what I've done. I've stuck him in a blooming trough. She probably felt as though she had let God down. So it's interesting what happened next, because that night there were some shepherds just outside Bethlehem looking after some sheep. These sheep probably were used as sacrifices in the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem had this huge temple, this big place where you would go to worship God. And what you had to do regularly was sort of acknowledge that you'd said things that were wrong or done things that were wrong. And what you would do is you would take a baby sheep with you, a lamb, and you would put your hand on the lamb as a way of sort of pretending that all the things that you had done wrong were transferring along your arm, through your hand, to the sheep. And then the sheep would be sacrificed to God as a way of saying sorry for all those things. And it just so happens that shepherds in Bethlehem often looked after these sheep. And they would spend day and night with their sheep, making sure that they were protected from wild animals, making sure they were well fed and well watered. And so one night, or the night of Christmas, there they were chatting. Shows the picture with them around a fire. We don't know if that was what was happening, but they were there looking after their sheep, when suddenly there was this bright light. And they turned round to see an angel appearing. Another sort of superhero-like angel. And he said, I've got some brilliant news for you. Bethlehem, just down the road from here, special person has just been born, the Son of God, the Messiah, the chosen one, the Lord. And you can't miss him. You won't find him in a cot. He's in a manger. And he's going to be all wrapped up in clothes, white clothes, all very tight to keep him warm. Swaddling clothes is the right term. And with that, this angel was joined by lots of other angels, and they started singing a song, saying, praise to God, and let there be peace on earth on all those who have God's favour. And then they disappeared. Well, the shepherds were amazed. They didn't get visits from anybody, let alone an angel, very often. And so they said to themselves, this sounds pretty important. And he's come and told us. There must be a reason for this. And so they decided that some of them should go and find this baby that we just heard about. And so they shot off down the hill to Bethlehem. And when they got there, sure enough, just as the angel described, they found this baby in a trough, wrapped up nice and tight in swaddling clothes. And I dare say, doesn't say it in the Bible, but I dare say Mary said, oh, it's nice to see you. What brings you here? And they told her how the angel had told them about this baby. And perhaps that reassured Mary. There she was, possibly worried that she was having to put baby Jesus, the Son of God, in a trough. But they came and said, look, God had sent an angel to them, ordinary shepherds, and told them where to find the baby. Maybe this was all part of God's plan. Perhaps God was meant to be born in a manger. And Mary thought about these things. And really, that is the end of the Christmas story. In the church calendar, this is where it ends. But I appreciate that if you ever watch a nativity play, nativity meaning the birth of Christ sort of play, it will go on a bit. So I'm just going to carry on and tell you the next bit, because it involves some wise men, or Magi as they were called. Now these guys, and you will see in this picture and all the other pictures, there's 3 of them. We have no idea really how many there were. It's not mentioned in the Bible how many there were. We even have a Christmas carol, We Three Kings of Orient Are, which suggests that there's 3, but we don't know. But these guys, as I say, they weren't really kings, they were called Magi. They were sort of not magicians as such, but people who were regarded as wise and good at sort of reading the signs. They would often look up into the sky and look at the stars and sort of, from looking at the stars, work out various things. It just so happened that one night they looked up and they saw this huge star, something brighter than any other. And they thought that means something special. And so they got their charts out and their scrolls, and they started working their way through, reading and sort of, right, what do you reckon? What do you reckon this means? Could it be this one, or maybe it's somehow these two connected? And in the end, they came to the conclusion that a king had been born. And when they looked and tried to work out, right, this star, where's it sort of above? It's Israel. There's a king of the Jews. And the fact that these stars point to this isn't just any king. This is a really special king. And so they got on their animals. We don't know what sort of animals they were on. What we do know, or we think we know, is that they lived in the country of Persia, which is now modern day Iran. And they were probably people who, they wouldn't have been Christians. Christianity wasn't actually in existence at that stage. They wouldn't have been Jews. They were probably worshipped in a religion called Zoroastrianism. But they felt that this king was so important that they ought to go and see. And so they followed the star. He sort of saw where it was and thought, right, we've got to go there. But of course, Israel's a big place. Why? Where would they find the king? And they probably thought to themselves, oh, well, kings are usually in important places, palaces, things like that, castles. And important places, well, castles you tend to find in the big cities. Jerusalem is the capital. Let's go to Jerusalem. Let's see him if he's there. And so off they went to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem was the king. Well, sort of king. His name was Herod the Great. Now, as I said earlier, actually Israel was under the control of the Romans. So really the person in charge of the whole of Israel and the whole of the Roman Empire was the emperor, so Caesar. But he would put local people in charge so that he didn't have to worry too much. He could just call upon them to do his bidding. And the guy in Israel was Herod. And Herod, well, to be honest, he's a bit like a certain president of a certain United States. He was rather arrogant. He was rather insecure. He liked his power. He didn't want his power taken away from him. And of course, he recognized that really the power came from Caesar. So he wanted to, well, he just didn't want to sort of have his power taken away. He feared Caesar maybe not liking him and sort of putting someone else in his place. So he was quite cruel. He would make sure that if anybody caused any hassle, he would get them thrown into prison or executed so that Caesar would not hear of any untoward rebellions or anything happening. And so you can imagine when these 3 strangers from another country turn up and say, oh, we've come to see the king. Well, I'm here. No, the one that's just been born. We read it in the stars. And is he here? Herod was worried. And so Herod went off to his experts and his religious people. There's some guys outside. They're looking for a newborn king. What are they on about? And these experts and the religious people, they started looking at their documents and said, well, Bethlehem. Bethlehem seems to be an important place. Maybe he's there. And so Herod worked out a plan. He went to the wise men from Persia and said, look, no, the newborn king's not here, but good to hear about this new king. Tell you what, you go and find them. We reckon Bethlehem, follow that star, see where it leads, find the child. And then, of course, when you find him, and when you've said your hellos to him, well, do come back here, won't you? Because actually, I would love to see him too. I would love to give him my best wishes. And so the wise men said, yeah, okay, fine. And so off they went, all the way to Bethlehem. And there they found a house. Interestingly, and this is why I said the Christmas story ended earlier, they find Mary in a house, not in a place where they look after animals. And when they got there, they presented their gifts to Jesus. Rather strange gifts for today. If I was to sort of say, I'm going to get a gift for a baby who's just been born, well, you might give them a teddy bear, might you? Or some clothes, a rattle, something to amuse them or something they can wear. But these guys turn up with gold, frankincense and myrrh. Well, they were expensive gifts, I'll give them that, but not really not very practical for a mum and a newborn baby. Gold, so experts suggest, was a sign that these wise men recognised that Jesus in some way was a king. Gold was a precious metal as it is today, and often worn by royalty. Frankincense. It's a sort of perfume, but it sort of comes in sort of like, almost like little lumps of sugar. Something similar to that. And it's used a lot in worship. The people, not just of Israel, but also of other parts of the world, would put pieces of frankincense on a burning fire, and up would go this sort of lovely smelling smoke as a sort of sign of people's prayers to God. And so by giving Jesus frankincense, there's this indication, we think that you might be sort of God. And then myrrh, this is the strange one. Myrrh was also a sort of perfume, but it was often used with dead bodies. It was used to stop the body rotting too quickly and smelling too badly. So interesting to give a newborn baby something for dead bodies. But of course, people reckon that they were sort of saying, Jesus is going to die, and in a special way. So they gave the gold, frankincense and myrrh to Jesus, and they worshipped him, they prayed to him, and then off they went. Well, fortunately, they were also visited by an angel who told them, don't go back to Herod. He means this baby no good. And so they went a different way back to their homes. Herod, well, he gradually worked out that he had been tricked, that these wise men weren't coming back. And so he was furious. The wise men, as I say, went a different way. You notice the picture of Jesus here. He's not a baby, he's a toddler. And the reason why we think he's a toddler at this stage is because Herod declared that his soldiers were to go out into the land and kill all the children 3 years and under. So we assume that he had worked out from when the wise men had arrived and when they had told him about this star, that Jesus by now He was a young little boy. Herod, as I say, said to his soldiers, get out there and kill every single child 3 years and under, because he did not want another king. He wanted to be king. And so outshot the soldiers. Fortunately for Jesus and Mary and Joseph, God once more gave them a warning. He warned them that Herod was after them. And so they escaped to Egypt, an adjacent country, and spent the next few years there until Herod died himself. And then it was safe to return. And so Joseph and Mary and Jesus, and possibly a donkey, we don't know, journeyed to Egypt. And that is definitely how the Christmas story finishes.
So why is Christmas so important to Christians? Well, let me first explain that if you went back in history, through the history of the church and through the history of Christian worship, you may be surprised to discover that until the year 336 AD, nothing was done to celebrate Christmas. And then, when it did start to be celebrated, it wouldn't be anything more than maybe the Bible readings at a church service might be the ones about Jesus' birth. And maybe there might be a prayer or two, but that would be it. You wouldn't notice Christmas being any different to any other day. Because to start with, it wasn't a big celebration. The big ones were Easter, the time when Jesus died on the cross on the Friday, and then Christians believe he rose again from the dead on the Sunday. That's why Christians celebrate as their main act of worship on a Sunday rather than any other day. And then there were a couple of other times during the year when there was a little bit more of a celebration. There was Pentecost, which sort of falls in sort of May time, when Christians celebrate that God sent his Holy Spirit, another aspect of God, to be with Christians and help them to live out a life that is pleasing to God, and things like that. And then the other one is something called Epiphany, which takes into account the 3 wise men seeing Jesus, but it had nothing to do with his birth as such. It was more the understanding that that is when the world began to realize that Jesus was more than just an ordinary human being. And so really, the way we do Christmas today, with so many different things like carol services and services to mark the actual change of time, a midnight service and Christingles and things like that, really didn't start until really Christmas was adopted by wider society by giving out presents and cards, and then the church just sort of developed their time of worship to really meet the needs of people that wanted to do more than simply cards and presents, and they wanted a sort of religious side of it as well. So what is important about Christmas? It's not so much celebrating Jesus's birth. As I say, it took over 340 years before people started to celebrate that. It's more about what it represents. Christians believe that Jesus Christ was a fully human being just like you and I, but also is fully God. He is the Son of God. Christians believe there is one God, but somehow that God manages to be 3 persons. It's a very complicated understanding, but it seems to be what the Bible sort of draws out, that somehow God manages to be 3 persons: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. And Christians believe the Bible indicates that Jesus as the Son of God, was present right from the beginning and will go all the way through to the end. But for that time, for some 33 years, he came to live on planet Earth with us. And we have a word really for the importance of Christmas, which is incarnation. Now, in case you're wondering what that's about, I don't know if any of you like chili con carne. Con carne literally means with meat, and carnation has that understanding. The incarnation is celebrating God with meat, that God came down in human flesh and lived the same life as us, and yet managed to do that without any selfishness, without any wrongdoing or wrong thinking or wrong speaking, what we call being without sin. And why is that important? Well, if you imagine, if you were God, ruler of the universe, creator of the whole universe, you could do anything you wanted. You could enjoy yourselves, put your feet up, whatever you wanted, you could do it. Christians believe that Jesus arriving as a baby on that Christmas day demonstrates that God was willing to go through anything for us. Just think, the creator of the whole universe was happy to poo in his pants, to need to be changed by his mum, to be winded and probably throw up over her shoulder like any other baby, to fall over and graze his legs and go through everything that we did. And of course, Christians believe that at the end of that was that Jesus died one of the most horrible deaths that's ever been created by human beings, the death on the cross, but that he rose again and defeated death for us. So there's that God is willing to go through everything or anything for us. The other thing is that because of that, because he's gone through everything that you and I have gone through, he knows what it's like for his friends to desert him, to be bullied by people, to be called names, to be rejected, all those hurtful things that sometimes you and I have to go through. And so when we say our prayers to God, however we're feeling, happy or sad, worried about something, then Christians believe that when they pray to God, God's not saying, oh, I wonder what they mean by that. I can't imagine what that can be like. Instead, God can say, I've been there. I got the t-shirt. I know what you are going through. So that's the second thing I think that Christmas teaches me. The third thing, I guess, is when we look at that whole story. The first people, as we saw, that visited Jesus were shepherds, smelly old shepherds who were regarded pretty low by most of society. They smelt a bit. They were out in the fields day in, day out, night in, night out. They weren't particularly looked up to. And then the other ones that are recorded in the Bible that came to see Jesus, were from another country. They were from another religion. They did sort of reading of the stars, what we might call astrology, which actually the Old Testament, the older part in the Bible, said you shouldn't do. In many ways, both the shepherds and the wise men were people that didn't fit into, at the time, the understanding of who God was about. And so in many ways, Jesus' birth and his welcoming of those visitors sort of says to me that Jesus is for everybody. Whether people believe in him or not, whether their understanding of him is different, and some religions do sort of accept that Jesus existed but don't sort of understand him as God. Whether we're from rich background or poor background, whether we live anywhere in this world, then Jesus was born and died on the cross for all of us. No one is outside God's love. And that for me is the third thing of why Christmas is important. God knows what we go through. God's willing to go through the same and worse for us. And no one is outside God's love. That's why Christmas is important. So I hope that's explained a little bit for you. Enjoy your Christmas. God bless.